Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the CEO's Desk, an ongoing conversation with Loyalty360 CEO Mark Johnson. In our last episode, we talked about what Gen Z expects from customer loyalty: personalization, relevance, values, experience, and ease of use. What stood out was how brands seem to agree on what Gen Z actually wants. Today, we're picking up where we left off, because knowing what Gen Z expects doesn't automatically translate into engagement. This episode focuses on why engaging Gen Z is still so difficult, even when brands believe they're doing the right things, and what loyalty leaders are learning as they try to close that gap. So, Mark, in the last episode, it sounded like brands pretty much understand what Gen Z wants, but the issue really is that there's still this gap between understanding what they want and actually executing on what they want. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think what we see, right? So when we interview people for our surveys, they are the individuals who are running customer loyalty, customer experience programs. So it's their perspective of what they're seeing. So some of that could be actual, some of it could be subjective, right? They think that the Gen Z demographic is doing X, Y, or Z. So there is a little bit of dissonance there. Some brands do their own surveys and they have kind of a deeper understanding, but many brands are really not leveraging the demographic data they have. And there's a number of concerns, and it comes up in the meetings we have with brands. So if you're going to take that data in and someone's under a certain age, under 18, under 16, whatever it may be, you have to be able to not action on it. And that can be a big concern, constraint, limitation, because many brands can't do that, right? They can take a lot of the data in, but the PII pieces can be a challenge, right? And so there's some legal concerns right now, and you actually have some series that's coming up on how to look at kind of the legal ramifications. A reputable law firm is going to talk about that coming up. But that's a big challenge. So if you take it in, you have to be able to not action it, or you don't take it in. So there is a kind of a modicum of concern right now, and growing concern. So many brands are kind of moving and becoming a little bit more reticent, a little more hesitant. So having the technology be able to action on a demographic is a big challenge. Legal concerns, there's kind of I won't say a chilling effect right now, but there are some legislative pieces that look at age discrimination on the older end. There's cases in New York, New Jersey, California, that that creates some consternation, so that they kind of spread that and kind of expand that to all demographics.
And would you say that those things that you just described, are those sort of the biggest internal barriers to sort of executing on a Gen Z strategy, or are there some other things internally, for example, like having the right people to think about Gen Z? Frankly, is there too much of an age gap, for example, with an existing staff that's working on a loyalty program compared to the age of the audience you're going after?
There could be a little bit of that, right? And it was interesting in this survey too, when we put it out. It's probably one of the more difficult surveys we've had to get responses to, because people are like, well, I'm not Gen Z, I really can't take this. So we really had to get sharp and clarify our language to get the numbers we needed to have kind of a reputable and a nice confidence interval there. So there is a little bit of a challenge in that regard. How how it reports up, because loyalty can be in marketing, it can be in operations, depending on how it rolls up. There may be different technology pieces that could be considered part of the customer loyalty stack. We've heard pretty significantly recently about many brands are focused on redoing their mobile applications and making sure that they're omni-channel, they're engaging, but all of those pieces may not kind of reside under the customer loyalty stack. Acquisition, or even in quote unquote engagement, gamification kind of sits out the side of loyalty sometimes. But when it's unified, you have a kind of a deeper insight into that. But they want experiences too. They're very focused on kind of experiential rewards. They want a deeper understanding from the brands, which is interesting as well. We saw in the surveys that experiential rewards, personalization are very important, but it's not necessarily maybe aligned traditionally. So you haven't achieved a certain threshold to get the opportunity for that experiential reward, right? You're not a high roller at MGM, or you don't have $1 million in the bank out of Bank of America, but yet the expectations from that group are still pretty austere, and then they're pretty significant. So that can be a challenge as well. So how do you create the experiences, surprise and delight potentially, or entities like Foot Locker or Dick's who have a new product drop? How do you kind of satiate that desire from the customer perspective that may not align with what the expectations are, because they have a more grandiose set of expectations than what you or I may have being in a customer loyalty program, right? We know we have to be in that top tier potentially, we have to spend this much, and if we don't, we shouldn't have those expectations. But we saw, at least in our surveys, that many brands feel that the expectations of experience, personalization, unique technologies are pretty significant.
And you mentioned data a couple times, and so as it relates to personalization, it seems like it's not, as you're sort of saying, it's not really a lack of data, but it's a kind of a struggle to activate that data.
Yeah.
What are the barriers there?
Well, I think that's kind of multifaceted, but it's never a data problem. The last couple of years we've heard from many brands that they're working with an agency or working with a consultant. They want them to bring in 15, 20 different data points. You really don't need that many data points. You need a solid 6 to 8, but also that fragmentation we talked about from a data perspective. Last year was a year where many brands focused on optimization. They weren't going to bring in 2 or 3 pieces of technology. They were going to find one weak point and address that, bring it in, whether it's a CDP or marketing orchestration engine, or maybe even a new customer loyalty platform. But we continue to hear about disconnected, fragmented, siloed systems that don't work well together. And compliance concerns, as we mentioned earlier, that's a big concern, right? So there's kind of a shift to being more cautious. That you even look what happened with GDPR and CCPA and some of those others. It creates some consternation from a legal perspective. And we've heard a number of times in lunch and learns that brands are kind of pulling back from demographic data because they feel more comfortable looking at behavioral data, transactional data, maybe some survey data from gamification or third-party overlays. They feel more comfortable with that. And there's ways to get to age through data appends, right? Taking something from an Experian or a Lime Ramp or a TransUnion potentially and overlaying that on their data file, they can get pretty close. And they feel that that's a lot easier than maybe, getting that age information. Unless you're a bank, right, or a credit union, or even casinos, they have to have that due to the regulatory concerns with their businesses. So compliance is a big concern. Personalization is very difficult as well. Personalization, as ranges from just having their name start off an email, but also it could be understanding their interests, their likes, what drives or enhances emotional loyalty. So there is a kind of continuum of personalization, and Gen Z usually wants to have kind of that more sophisticated, deeper, quote unquote, know me. And you hear that quite often. They want the brand to know them. They want to have the same values, they want the same interests. And that's where many of these brands struggle, especially last year with some of the economic headwinds that hit different brands in different manners. I mean, that was a big concern, right? We can't bring on 3 or 4 technologies. We can only bring on one, and we have to optimize that. And that's where our focus is. And also looking at partnerships. Brands are very interested in partnerships that can work in a manner to give them additional earning opportunities, potentially reward opportunities. There's a line between the 2 brands, but as you move from affiliate-based partnerships to more focused or bespoke partnerships, there's challenges there too. You have to get them approved. It becomes a legal morass potentially to get the right contract in place, the financial considerations, knowing your customer, and then invariably, oftentimes, the co-marketing is the biggest challenge, and that tends to go awry quite often, right? If you can't have alignment on both brands and how they're going to promote it, I mean, that doesn't necessarily have value to the brands. I think brands want to get to the technology stack and to kind of the compliance approach that would enable more of this, but they're again, it's shifted over the last year to be a little more a little less aggressive, right? They want to make sure everything's in compliance. and it seems to be growing that way.
Okay, so let's say that a brand has sort of chosen its path as it relates to trying to engage with their Gen Z customers. One of the big things that we talk about on a regular basis is how do you measure that? And so over time, brands may have had, a certain set of techniques, a certain set of measurements that they've used, certain set of metrics, KPIs. How do those differ when it comes to Gen Z, if maybe at all?
Yeah, so I think there is different, like the whole engagement paradigm. One of the things we asked in the survey too is what types of personalization efforts are important to them. So, gamification was there, but also personalized content, personalized offers, personalized rewards. Maybe from partner opportunities as well. But when you look at the whole gamification piece, significant focus there. Some of the aggregators there, the Ibotta's and Upsides, they have a pretty significant engagement level. But does that necessarily drive further engagement with one brand, right? I think that most people or most brands, as we mentioned earlier, they're focused on that behavioral perspective, right? They're looking at the transactions, the spend, the frequency. And I think there's just a deeper level of comfort level there. And then you probably read recently too, attribution is challenging usually to what's that last push that makes them buy that car or buy that box of Fruit Loops. It's significantly challenged, and the more data points you have, it is more challenging as well. But the transactional pieces, the promotional pieces, are easy to measure because many brands we hear and we see that they're just focusing on channel, right? It's the value of the program and what channels do we need to get that to Gen Z and to engage them.
So in all the conversations that you've been having, with brands over the past, 6 months, 12 months, as it relates to this particular audience, are there any things that stand out to you that are actually working with this audience? You talked about, certain engagement opportunities and the experiential and emotional side of loyalty seems to be what resonates more with this audience. Are there certain brands that you've seen that are doing stuff that's really working?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about and or we see, and we should have touched on a little earlier, is kind of the whole idea of value. Brands are hearing from their customers today, and it's kind of a tale of two cities right now. Some brands are doing very well, some brands may be struggling a little bit, but how their unique set of customers see value, what it means to them. It could be a sliding scale that Sephora may put in where I can use $1.50 of my rewards because we know that Gen Z wants that instant gratification. They're less likely to save award or currencies for higher level redemptions. They want that value, and that could be how they kind of show that. They're focused on digital experience, but I think the challenge too is relevance over scale. Making sure that you're at least relevant on a baseline to the customers, and maybe not too granular per se. But that can be challenging with Gen Z because they want more personalized offers. They want more personalized communications. They want to know what their friends may have bought or may have had at Applebee's the night before. So they look to their friends, the peer groups, the influencers as well. But how do brands action on that? That gets to be a big challenge. And also, when brands simplify kind of the approach and they're using channels, they can communicate the value of the program, and the value of the program, is resonant. They're not devaluing the program or making the currency worth less. They continue to say that Gen Z will get involved in the program. They do prefer everyday low prices, maybe an Audi or a Walmart. But once you get them involved in the program, they can see that value as it resonates to them. It could be a free product or a spec sheet on making tacos, right? And you get the tomatoes free from Del Monte. They can create very unique engagement, and they'll be significant advocates for the program. So that's, I think brands are doing more of that. They're trying to simplify the program, understanding what value means holistically, but also, more generally as well. If people are having a challenge putting food on the table, or if they're looking for $1.50 or $2 off their next pair of jeans at American Eagle. How do you enable that? Because if that's what they want, it's going to create that engagement. Because it's that listening idea, listening to their customers, providing that value. But many brands are, they struggle with, even putting in a sliding scale. I have 250. It's not 500 points. You don't have that $5 off. Well, enabling them to redeem that 250, if that's what they want, what they're asking for, it's helps drive that engagement, that longer term emotional loyalty, and it definitely fills that value gap.
Gotcha. Well, so to sum up, it sounds like brands know what Gen Z expects, and we've kind of talked about that, and had sessions about it, and brands sort of acknowledge it. But the challenge really is aligning with the people and the platforms and the processes to kind of deliver on that promise.
Yeah, I think you did a great summary there. It's really about performance, right? And how can they execute on those expectations, right? And it's better to maybe underperform a little bit and be able to execute than overperform and not, right? Don't take data that you may not be able to action on, or don't have them give you a lot of data points or insight, or zero party data you may not be able to action on. Simplicity, understanding your technology constraints, but also your organizational constraints on execution are very important, because that sets a baseline of expectations. But providing value, providing simplicity, and then providing those engagement opportunities, whether they're different payment applications like a buy now, pay later, or being able to use Apple Pay or Google Pay, as simple as that, and then be at register, that provides kind of a unique engagement paradigm for Gen Z.
Perfect. Well said. Mark, we'll see you next time on the CEO's Desk.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day.